Hi everybody. I wanted to give you group feedback about your excellent discussion in the forum about terrorism. I presented you with 4 questions and all of you stepped up and addressed them in an interesting and complex way. My first question to you was, is terrorism a threat globally? Is this a problem for international politics? And most of you, or almost all of you, answered a clear yes, that terrorism can happen anytime and at any place, and because of that, it is a global threat. I moved on to ask you if you think that some countries suffer from terrorism more than others. And here, the answers varied a little bit. Some of you said that yes, absolutely, terrorism is a larger threat in some countries. For example, some students pointed to the Middle East, or more specifically to the countries of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And that is true, because in those countries, if you look at the past several years, you talk about month and month of constant attacks that happen daily or at least weekly. So that's a far cry from what we are used to when we think about terrorism in the United States or in other Western European countries, even though we do have attacks happening here. Many of you pointed that attacks can happen in the USA, but that generally speaking, they don't happen as often, as I just said, and therefore you feel that the risk for a terror attack is lower in the United States. And like I said, on this point, there was some disagreement between you, which is great. Disagreement is where we learn, when we debate and we expand the discourse. And then, more specifically, you pointed to the fact that soft targets and especially in large cities, soft targets are those targets that are not normally guarded or secured very well. So for example, your public transportation system, concerts, museums, right? There's some security in them, but they're not as fortified as a federal building or some banks or other places like that. And you said that those soft targets, and especially in large cities and where there are gathering of a lot of people, that those are places that will be in higher risk for a terror attack. And then finally, there were some students who pointed to that there are some groups in the population that will be more prone to experience a terror attack. A number of you talked about the fact that we had some domestic terrorist attacks here in the United States against the Jewish population or against the Black community or the gay community. And so if you're a member of one of those communities, you are more likely to experience a higher risk of being harmed or experience a terror attack. Which leads us to the third question. I asked you, is terrorism a threat to you? Do you personally feel threatened by terrorism? And here we can kind of divide the large majority of answers to two groups. One group that basically stressed the point that we are mostly safe in the United States. Not that it can't happen, it can, but you don't go about being afraid of a terror attack. And the other group that says, yes, it can happen to me, and that increases my insecurity. I feel threatened, at least to some degrees. Here, some of you were talking about the fact that we are living in New York City. It's a large city. You go to a university, you spend time in large gathering of people, And so all of those are those soft targets that could be, it could attract terrorism. And the other kind of line of argument of why you feel threatened was much more personal and relied on the legacy or the trauma of, for many of you, the 9/11 2001 terror attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon and the airplane that went down in Pennsylvania, or knowing somebody else that was hurt in a different attack, either in the United States or in another country. And so if you have some kind of a personal touch with terrorism, I think it's safe to conclude that you are much more likely to feel threatened by terrorism. And then finally, I asked you, okay, so what can we do? What should be our counterterrorism approach? And here we got a whole bunch of answers. Some of you talked just about the fact that we need to increase security, secure those soft targets, rely more on the police, airport security, security in any place that we have large number of people. But also that we should use military operation and try to go on the offensive in order to combat terrorism. Another approach, or that I mean, all of those approaches can overlap with each other. You don't have to choose either or. Some of you said that we need to rely a lot about technology. There was a discussion about specialized heavy boots against IEDs, improvised explosive devices. There was discussion about facial recognition or other increased surveillance. And generally speaking, this idea that we can and should rely on inventions and technology. However, at the same time, there were some of you who thought that we shouldn't rely so much on this new technology, but instead, emphasize more the increased traditional security. Of course, there were those of you who thought that we should just not give in to terrorism, live our life, that is a counterterrorism strategy on its own. So we shouldn't be giving up to fear. There are many more Americans that die from a number of other causes, including falling off a bed at night randomly, right? And then finally, there was a bit of this discussion about the tension between liberty and security, which ties into the other counterterrorism measures that of increased security or relying on technology, where this idea is that the more liberty we want, the less security we get, and vice versa. If we want to be extremely secure, we can, but then we have to give up on our freedoms, such as we did after 9/11 when we enacted the Patriots Act and gave law enforcement officials and agencies expanded authorities, right? And so we need to, in this idea of live your life, we need to, as a society, decide where on the continuum between liberty and security do we want to be. Obviously, there are the two extremes. Probably none of us want to be in either of those extremes, because even extreme liberty, that means that you have no security at all. You may like that place. Some people may like the extreme security, even if they have to give up on liberty. Most of us will find ourselves somewhere in the middle over here. And then finally, there is this idea of counterterrorism by engagement, by education, by de-radicalization of some populations, change to foreign policy if the foreign policy seems to attract the attention of terror organization, or trying to address the root cause. What are those people really want, aside from the fact that they stand up and say that they want to destroy the United States, or they want to destroy all Christians, or they want to destroy all Muslims, right? What do they really want? Can we engage with that? Can we have a conversation? If it's poverty, can we address that, etc., right? So that was another level or another layer that you mentioned when we talked about counterterrorism. And so all in all, there were some of you who very accurately said that first, before we discuss terrorism, we need to define terrorism. But I just wanted to get your perceptions and get you talking about your thoughts and ideas about the threats of terrorism. So that was that. Good discussion, and I'll see you next time.